the Ponoi River in the Kola Peninsula, Tierra del Fuego, Iceland, Alaska. These are some of the greatest destinations in the world to chase migratory salmon and steelhead, and today's guest has guided in all of these locations and is in charge of U.S. operations for a brand you might not be fully aware of yet. Today, you're going to get some tips on choosing the right two-handed rod and line so you can have more success and a chance at an anadromous fish landed this year. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid, grew up around a little fly shop, and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers and guides than just about anyone out there. Max Kantor, headman at Guideline USA, is going to take us on a journey around the world chasing Atlantic salmon, Pacific salmon, steelhead. We're going to get into chinook. We're going to talk about it all today. You're going to find out why Russia's Kola Peninsula is this greatest destination for Atlantic salmon and his experience, and how they got kicked out of Russia. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk fly lines. We're going to talk Scandi versus Skagit and why the Scandi line might be the go-to line for you. Lots of evolution here, and then we're also going to find about his passion for stripers in the Northeast. That's where it all started for Max today. Plus, you're going to get his top 3 tips if you find yourself chasing Atlantic salmon this year. Here we go. Max Kantor from GuidelineFlyFish.com. How you doing, Max?
Doing well. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on today. We always love a good chat when we get into swinging flies and Spey, and I think that Guideline has a unique angle because of some of the history we're going to talk about here. We hear a lot about Scandi, Skagit, the Spey, all that stuff, double-handed, single-handed. There's all sorts of things going on there. But so we're going to get into all that today and talk about maybe setting some people up with the right equipment. You guys have it all there. So, but before we get in there, let's take it back real quick on fly fishing with your background. How did you get into it, and kind of what's your first memory?
First memory is too far now to look back to. I grew up in the northeast of the U.S. in Connecticut, and that meant some trout, and it also meant our cold water, saltwater species on fly, so striped bass, bluefish, false albacore, all that fun stuff. I went out west for school, ended up in Colorado, and the trout fishing side of things got a lot more serious. And then I jumped headfirst into it, like a lot of people in the U.S. do, and started guiding up in Alaska. And from there, it only got more serious, and I ended up guiding and then managing Russia's Ponoi River on the Kola, a little bit of time down in Argentina on the Rio Grande for sea run browns, some time guiding in Iceland for Atlantic salmon too, and a lot of fly fishing travel in between for swinging flies and pretty much everything else.
Pretty much everything else, yeah. And when did you connect to Guideline? When did all that come to be?
So my first connection with Guideline, I actually, and like a lot of people in the U.S., I hadn't heard of them before really jumping overseas for the first time. That would have been 2018 on the Ponoi, and I got over there, and like you do when you're starting a guide job and learning a river for the first time, I brought along a U.S.-made two-hander, and I broke it during scouting. So that left me with one of the Lodge rods, which was actually it's an older model, but it was a custom Ponoi fall run Guideline LXI 13989, and that kind of opened my eyes a little bit about what two-hand rods can actually do, about the variety of lines that they can take, and grew into like adjusting my casting style also, and being more effective with them. But yeah, got over there for the first time, and everyone's in Guideline waders, everyone's in Guideline boots, and it was just like a whole new world opened up. And then some of our Scandinavian staff were actually over as guests. So the head product designer Leif came over while I was guiding, spent a little bit of time with him, on the water and of course off. Got to play around with one of the prototype. I think it was the Elevation series he brought over, which is our entry level, but they're sweet rods. He caught some fall run fish on that. I think I made like one cast and got a little one. We'll get into that later, but that river was insane. But yeah, was pretty much on board from then on out. And I told them whenever they were thinking about heading towards the USA, give me a call. They're not a new company. They've been around for well over 30 years at this point, but the U.S. project is coming along nicely now.
So the Ponoi, that's definitely an interesting one we've heard a little bit about. Maybe describe that a little bit, and we'll talk about how the lines fit into this and the rods and all the gear and stuff. But what was that like? How did you get to connect to that? Because maybe first describe what we're talking about for those that don't know. What is the Ponoi? Why is it so special?
So the Ponoi River is, without a doubt, probably the best Atlantic salmon river in the world. I got really lucky to show up there and get to guide and manage it for a brief period before that shut down. But just as a well, shut down to foreigners, but just as a place in general, focusing on that. It's run as a natural preserve. You're you have 3 runs of fish that come into the river. You have a fall run that's everyone looks forward to. They overwinter and then you fish to them again in the spring, but they're not kelts. They'll spawn that next following fall. You have a regular summer run, and then you have last year's fall run. So at any given time towards the fall, you'll have a prolific number of fish there. In the spring, you don't wait for runs of fish. You just wait for the water to settle, for the ice to break, and your fishing is there. It's super remote. It's 350 kilometers by helicopter from anything. And it's just kind of this international fly fishing, anadromous fish enthusiast camp in the middle of nowhere. You get out there and everyone's really like-minded. The guides are a mix of local and international. Everyone brings in sort of a different flavor to their fishing and guiding. And as far as absorbing a ton of information, there's really no better place to do so. I'm definitely really privileged to have learned a lot from some of the senior guides there. And the more time you spend there, you get in your rhythm of guiding, and you get to pick apart that river yourself. But it's a big river.
It's big, and this is in Russia, right?
It is.
Yeah. So it's kind of a unique place in Russia. It's kind of way up north. I mean, right next to, everything, right? Finland, Norway, kind of right there. And this is Atlantic salmon too. That's what we're talking about.
Yes. Yes. Sorry. So it's the Kola Peninsula. So right up there next to Scandinavia at the bottom right of the mitten, pretty much.
So can you give us a little history on the Ponoi? Like, how did that come to be was it a research river? Maybe talk about how that came where this international group landed up there.
Yeah. So to my knowledge, there had been a commercial salmon operation that was on and off up until everything opened in 1991. And then you had some American-led groups setting up a pretty rudimentary camp there at first. Bounced around a little bit until it found its more current owner, but it's now run as a total catch and release, conservation-minded river for hopefully those that can get there sometime in the near future.
And so it's still being run as kind of a research. And is it mostly like who's able to go there now?
It's kind of a tricky one, and I was thinking about how to approach this at the moment. I was manager of the place up until everything shut down in 2022. And yeah, I know they're taking some guests, but I think at the moment it's more just run as for the research and conservation side of it, which is nice to see. It's one thing to not be able to get to go there. It's another to know that run of fish is safe and protected.
So stuff's still being protected. And then is there a chance, do you think, things in the future, I guess, depending on the geopolitical, right, stuff and all that that might open back up for people to head out?
I would hope that sometime in my lifetime, yeah. At this point, I'd say I don't know if I'm qualified to speak on it, but
Yeah.
you can hope just for the sake of getting to experience that place and the fish and everything else aside, yeah.
How is the Ponoi different from, and we've talked a lot Atlantic salmon all around the world, different places, and you're not far from Norway. We've heard things about ups and downs of numbers of Atlantic salmon, but how is that different, do you think, than some of these other places? Maybe talk size of river, numbers of fish, all that.
Yeah, so the 3 runs of fish that I mentioned is probably the biggest factor. You have these fish coming in towards the fall and then overwintering under the ice without spawning. So you have this group of fish that's always in there. And when you come in the spring, I'm sure you've touched on this in your podcast before, but the difference of fishing a running fish or a holding fish. You know, in the fall there, you fish running fish and you learn how to do that. But when you show up in the spring, it's not like the UK or early summer fishing in Norway where you're waiting for a big chrome springer to come in. You are fishing to a rested fish that's been there holding, and it is so happy.
It is. So a resting fish is easier to catch than a running fish?
Depends on your situation. There's the ethical implications of targeting them resting too late. But of course, you're always wanting to swing flies into a fish that has stopped. It goes with the running fish as well. You target them at choke points. You target them above and below rapids at natural places where those fish are going to hold, where they at least have a brief second to jump on your fly.
Waters West Fly Fishing Outfitters is the trusted name for swung fly techniques, two-handed casting, and chasing anadromous fish. And if you're serious about fly tying, their materials are the gold standard, and anglers across the OP and beyond know it. Ed and Kyle are ready to help you gear up and get out there, whether you're exploring new waters or perfecting your craft. You can visit wetflyswing.com/waterswest to connect and stock up and support this podcast while supporting a great shop. Check out Jackson Hole Fly Company today. Premium fly gear straight to your door without the premium price. Jackson Hole Fly Company designs and builds their own fly rods, reels, flies, and gear, delivering quality you can trust at prices that let you fish more and spend less. Whether you're picking up a fly rod for the first time or guiding every day, they've got what you need. Check them out right now. That's jacksonholeflycompany.com. jacksonholeflycompany.com. What did that look like as far as the rods and the lines? Kind of, and maybe talk first. Like, is this a pretty big river? What would be the comparison size river?
Oh, it's large. It's Clearwater sized.
Yeah, Clearwater. So it's big river. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. But you're fishing it kind of in an interesting way. A lot of the time, the fishing is done out of a jet boat. So you're driving the jet boats around, and you have a slip anchor system. Of course, if anyone wants to get out and wade, there's a million places that they can. But even though it's a big river, I found myself you need to narrow it down somehow. You're fishing to the spot, not the river itself, and breaking that down to where you can make sense of everything that's going on there. So as far as rods go, I would say that anything really over 14 feet makes it trickier, especially when you're landing fish from the boats. There was always a trick with that, and there was a trick with getting guests to present you the fish at the net. But yeah, I would say for a lot of the fishing, even outside that place and other places that I guided, you're 13, 13 and a half, 13.9. It's kind of grown into the standard, really, really comfortable two-hand size.
And then what would be the line? Let's just stay on the guideline stuff. What would be the line that you guys were using there, or maybe that would fit for this bigger water stuff?
So this is also the tricky part, and it's where I learned a ton about swinging flies too, because it's a long season. You're there from May to October, so you get every water condition. You get cold water, you get really warm water in the summer. You get the river's tannic. It doesn't really blow out except for really significant wind events for the lake upstream. But before then, my guiding in Alaska was pretty standard for what's the par for someone learning how to fish a two-hander from the U.S., which is you get a rod that can handle a king, you get a heavy Skagit, you get some T-tips, T11, T14, T17, and you go from there. When we arrive on the Kola there, there's icebergs floating down the river. Like, the water is 1 degree Celsius. So for the beginning of the season, you had two choices, is what I really learned. You could go the Skagit route, and for a lot of guests that made sense, and put those same T-tips on for a little bit. Or you go with a multi-density sinking line, and the densities are quite extreme. Your belly it'd be the Scandinavian equivalent of a Skagit fist, where your head might be sink 1, sink 3, and then your tip is 5-7, and then you get this really nice gradual sink that lets you fish the fly and move it in between structure and stay in touch with it, and you can do a ton with that setup. And to be honest, it's really not that hard to cast. The casting style is a little bit different, but they're pretty effective lines, and then you can change your tip or even change your head based on what you're looking to do. And then as that water warmed up, and it did really quickly, by the time it hit about 8 degrees Celsius, your floating head and intermediate tip are maybe sink three, and then you get into where your dry fly fishing, your skating fly is really effective. And from the beginning or middle of June, depending on the year, all the way to the middle of September, your standard rig is not going to be a Skagit. It's going to be a shorter, compact Scandi, either ending in floats or ending in something with a light density tip, intermediate.
And is the difference between the Skagit, just for those that are newer to it, Skagit versus Scandi, is it what makes the bigger? I mean, one's heavier like the garden hose, but how would you characterize the big difference?
The Scandi is going to be a little bit longer, though there are some modern Scandis that are compact or short. That's something we make as well, and they're really easy to deal with. But the benefit that you get from the Scandi too is that, like you said, garden hose with the Skagit, it's narrower, it's still tapered, but your presentation is going to be way quieter. So, for those looking to branch out or say water flows are down on a certain river, I've done this on the OP for Steelhead too, which is, generally a Skagit and T-tips type of place. You fish the hoe in really low water flows and put on a density light Scandi, and suddenly you're not spooking fish. In Argentina and Rio Grande, on the calmer days, we'd put drones up and you can watch the fish in the pools react to a Skagit slap. It scares them. Like, it absolutely puts those fish down. So, jet boat aside, on the Kola, say you're walking into a river with more sensitive fish like that, they're in the run. I would tell my guests to barely get their feet wet for their first pass through. And if they could, try to fish it as with as much stealth and with as much finesse as possible. And the way to achieve that now is the Scandinavian route.
Right. What do you guys think is your, in the U.S. stuff? What is your best selling line? Is it pretty clear which one, or you guys, what's that look like?
We've got something new coming out this year that I'm actually really excited for. I got to play around with the prototype a little bit, and it's one that's called the Classic Scandi Body. It starts at about, it's made to take tips, I should say, and it starts at about an 8-9, and it builds up from there. So it's not in those lower rod weights yet. The cool thing about it is, if you cut your T-tips accordingly, it doesn't need to just take those lighter Scandinavian style, like light density tips. You don't need to put Sync 3 on there. You could put T14 on it. I really like to fish that way. It simplifies the Scandi for me. It's not too long. We can look up the specific head length later, but it's not overwhelming. When I was learning this, I thought of Scandis as, okay, the head itself without the tip is going to be over 30 feet. Skagit will be less, even 34, 35 feet, and then you get into your short and long belly Spey lines. But where this is going, I think you're getting the benefits of how Scandis fish without the step that it takes to learn to cast them effectively.
Right. So you could fish all the heavier stuff, like you said. That's really interesting at the Kola up there where you're fishing, where you started. You're there early enough, so you had the whole thing, the early, deeper stuff, and then a little bit higher, and then eventually dry flies.
Yep.
And does it sound like this is classic Scandi? Could you use this for like all around like that if you were there again on the Ponoi, fish it all throughout the year?
Everything but the very beginning and the very end, and it depends on the place, because there's still types of water that those fish do move around, and there are so many of them. So the fun thing about that place is that there were no wrong answers. There's only ones that were more right. So as long as you got your water speed and read the conditions on any given day, like, you would be successful. But it was the matter of going out and really maybe having 5 chances or having 30. It's the numbers that came along with that place. We didn't like to talk about it as a numbers only zone, but it really is what it was. You could, so to answer your question there, I would take something like that line and I would have it in the boat for my guests and say I had them fishing it at the beginning. But I might keep something with a fast sinking head to tip on it as well for different spots and mix that up depending on if the fish were super lethargic, if we had them in some of the deeper zones. It's not a ridiculously deep river, but some of the beats had some holding water like that.
Gotcha. Okay. And there's a couple of things you mentioned. It's kind of cool because you've had like experience all around from what we're talking about here, Atlantic salmon, to the chinook fishing in Alaska, everything in between. What's that look like with the king fishing? How, what were you guys using up there, or how similar is that? Are there any similarities between that and Atlantic? I mean, you got these two salmon, right? But are they quite a bit different, Atlantic salmon versus king salmon?
Atlantic salmon are, Salmo salar and king salmon are Oncorhynchus, so that the kings are more closely related to the steelhead or rainbow, and your Atlantic is going to be more closely related to a brown trout. And Atlantic is this like weird mix of a steelhead and a brown trout and how they act. First of all, they don't die. They're not making one run up to spawn and then die. They can actually do it multiple times. And when they turn into their spawning phase, they actually look quite a bit like a brown trout. But in how they respond to flies, and in Iceland, you could see this with putting flies over fish that you can see and watching their behavior. Compared to a chinook, these fish are willing to move so far to a fly if they're happy. A happy Atlantic salmon is one of the easiest fish in the world to catch. It's just the rest of them that are a pain. It's kind of like permit, but
Yeah.
you find the right one, and the nice thing about some of these places is there are a lot of right ones. It gets trickier when you look at something like Norway spring fishing, where the water's huge and people are fishing 15 footers, and that's where those really heavy, both gradual and heavy density sink tips and lines come into play.
So you mentioned, the 13 and a half, the 13.9, they seem to be it sounds like it's the wheelhouse for all around the world now. It sounds like maybe that, I'm not sure if that's totally true, but there's still a few strongholds, right? What's that look like on the worldwide thing? I know what the U.S. looks like. It's mostly that shorter stuff, but are people still fishing the really long stuff, 14, 15 footers? And do you see a change overall, maybe even in the U.S., where people are starting to go longer?
Longer, not so much in the U.S. I know we were talking a little bit before this about the Togiak and Kings, and that's one place that you could still go longer, like 14, 13.9. That's totally fine there. But worldwide, you do see those longer rods for spring cold water fishing conditions. So I know they do it in the UK a bit. It's funny. That's actually the one place I haven't. Oh, there in Canada, haven't fished for Atlantics. I've done the Scandinavian stuff and the other things we've touched on, but in the UK they are fishing the longer ones. In other parts of the Kola, they would at the beginning of their season. In Argentina, towards the mouth of some of the rivers, they might. I know on Santa Cruz and some of the king salmon fishing down there, they might. But with modern lines, other than these really special cases, it's kind of, at least my thinking, that there's not a lot that you can't do with a 13 or a 13.5 foot rod.
Right. That's the thing. So what is the longer stuff? And that's probably because of the right technology. It's all evolved over time. But what was originally the longer rods? And they even had longer than 15 footers. But what was the benefit? Was you've got this long line, so it's easier to cast it, right? What was the biggest thing back in the day before they went to short lines?
Yeah, well, anything longer than 15 feet, other than maybe a few really specific cases, it's for tournament casting. So
Oh, okay.
it's for distance. So we've got a tournament rod of our premium line, the NT11, coming out, and like you're saying, it's for these longer lines that they're using in situations like that. But I would say that's for distance and for the casting side of it more so than the fishing side of it. And if you look at the casting stroke, it is a bit different. It's certainly different than Skagit casting, but it's different than what we're doing with these compact Scandies as well. You're opening up your anchor. You have 15 feet of rod to do that. You're getting your bottom hand really far up to drive it down and in. It's not just a quick little pull. Um, And there's certainly very little room for error when you're with a head that.
Right. Yeah, that's the biggest thing, right? That's the thing that the Skagit is nice for, is that people, you can within like hours sometimes, right, bring in a new person to learn the thing. What was your transition to Spey like when you got into it? Sounds like you jumped right into the one of the most amazing places in the world. But do you still have some struggles? How did your Spey? Did you have some good teachers along the way?
I had some great teachers. It's funny that's I owe a lot to some of the other guides that had been long-standing members at that place. I learned a lot from them, both on the casting and the space side, but also the Atlantic salmon fishing and just guiding in general side of things. But it wasn't a crazy transition, when you're over there to start to guide, like you're there to guide, not to fish. So it's not like you're doing a ton of casting at the start, but you certainly pick some things up and are practicing them. But the cool thing with modern Scandies is that the transition is not that difficult. It's just a matter of picking the right one for your fishing conditions. And I was going to touch on this later, but we used to do this for single handers as well. So we make something called a ULS, the ultralight Scandi, and they're single hand rated. You can put them on our ULS rod, or you can put them, on the standard matching single hand one, and you can add a haul into your Spey cast. You can single hand Spey cast them super effectively, and it's a trick that, especially in Iceland and Argentina, that we started doing for new guests and new anglers that really had trouble dealing with wind. And in both those places, in these situations, like say you're on the tributary of Rio Grande, the wind's blowing 100 miles an hour, and most of the time, what you would put in your hand there is a 10-foot single hand rod and a light sink tip. What we started doing instead, and it saved my butt a few times in Iceland too, was this short, compact Scandi head. It's still really quiet. You can do literally anything and turn it over. You can overhead it. One haul works best. Just put the shooting head right to the tip and let it go, and it'll go. You can do your waterborne Spey cast. You can add a haul to those. They're just super fun and super effective, and it's really there for all skill levels. You can put it in someone's hands for the first time, and the cool thing about places like this, or the thing that makes people jealous about places like this, is you don't need to, as long as you get your fly out and swinging straight and do what you need to do, and it's gonna get rewarded.
Right.
The biggest fish I ever guided down in Tierra del Fuego was with one of these single hand Scandi Spey lines. And it was with a lady who had never touched a fishing rod in her life before. She didn't, if you'd given her a spin rod, it would have been the same result. She had no idea. Her husband had gone a few times down there, and I think any guide listening to this podcast knows how this story goes.
Yeah.
But she fishes for 2 days with other guides and is struggling. The two-hander's not going to happen. It's fishing in general is probably not going to happen. I had one of those. This was our float sink 1, sink 3 ULS line, ready to go on another reel with the running line spooled up. Took the reel off the single hand rod on the car, put that on our pool that evening, which for everybody is when these sea trout start to get really active. You fish right up until dark. It's illegal to fish after dark down there, but you can fish through the sunset, and you can save your day in that last hour. That's when, if you've been struggling, that's your 40 minutes to make things happen. And this was even a little before that, but we get to our pool that's pretty narrow. The wind is favorable for it, and all she has to do is flip this thing out 25 feet. And with this line, she's doing it. Goes tight. She doesn't do anything. Lifts when I say lift. And of course, a 29-pound sea run brown starts
Oh, really?
floating all over the surface. Yeah.
No kidding.
30,
Holy cow.
40-inch fish. I jumped in the pool and basically netted it before we had it.
Had a
Luckily,
chance.
low water, but yeah, before something went really bad. And
Oh my gosh. 29 pounds.
yeah, it was an insane fish. But I'd like to say there was more to what I could have done in that situation, but it was the line.
Yeah. It was a line. It makes sense. And the cool thing is it's the overlap of single hand, a Spey. So like anybody that has a rod, is this the true, like if somebody's got a rod sitting there right now, whether it's a 8-weight or a 7-weight, would this line you're talking about work on any of these rods that people have?
Absolutely. We've got them down to 5. So the ULS, they're switch rods that go with them, but it's a true Scandinavian switch where it's single hand rated. So the 5-weight is a real 5-weight. The 6-weight's a real 6-weight. You could put the grain and gram window will be there on the side. It's there on every rod that we make. Yeah, you could fit your weight forward line between that window and the 6 will really be a 6. Or you put the shooting head on and achieve the same result. And then, like you said, it goes the other way. If you have a 6-weight that you want to try swinging soft tackles for getting into trout spey and you don't want to invest all the way into the rod, you can still work on your casts with a single hand designated spey line.
Right. So you can still do it. You kind of have both. Yeah. I mean, the single hand, we hear that a lot, the single hand, and I do it too. It's just, it's nice. You're out there fishing for trout or whatever, and being able to do a spey cast in some situations makes a lot of sense, to get your line out there. This is cool. So, well, I'm going to take it back here. We were talking Atlantic salmon. We've kind of been all around the world, which is cool. I mean, you've pretty much fished some of the best destinations you could think of. But back to Kings, if we're taking it to Chinook, let's talk Togiak going for Chinook. What is the line you'd recommend for that sort of species?
I would start with the classic Scandi Body and then add your T-tips on there and cut those tips accordingly to fit the grain window of the rod. Or we go with something that we make called the 4 density line, and then you're getting the equivalent of the fist, the sinking head, that is. So it's a sinking Scandi head instead of a sinking Skagit head. It's still quite short. It'll still handle king flies, heavy, large intruders. You want that upswing where the fly to come down and basically come back up and almost bump them in the nose, but come in front of them. Though they will move for a fly. Like really, really happy kings do eat, but of course you got to be a little bit heavier than you would for all the other species, even if it's still warmer.
And is that the same thing when you, again, the comparison, those Chinook getting them right there versus, say, that early season Atlantic salmon on the Ponoi?
It was pretty similar, yeah. The only difference in Atlantic salmon fishing versus king salmon in my little guide playbook was for Atlantic salmon, if anyone is doing a mend, I tell them to mend downstream and speed it up. They're happy to move to the fly, and then I would get my depth, my desired depth with either my line or my fly. I like tubes. I know a lot of people like tubes, but you can tie it on brass, you can tie it on copper, you can get a little more depth than just putting a pair of dumbbell eyes on.
Yeah, right, that is a good point. Yep. So tubes are great. Cool. So that's kind of the Chinook, and then you like you said, the same line, classic Scandi line for Atlantic salmon, like you said, pretty much in all situations except for maybe the super early or the super late of the season. And then what about for steelhead? You're heading up to the Clearwater or any of these rivers. What would the line be?
Depends on your summer versus winter steelhead.
Yeah, let's take it first. Let's say summer steelhead. Let's say Deschutes.
Deschutes?
Yeah.
I need to fish it.
Yeah, well, it'd be similar to. I think Deschutes is kind of probably a similar Clearwater, right? Whatever.
Gotcha. I've got a couple Guideline endorsed guides there that I need to head out and visit. It's been too long, but it's also been too crazy with setup this last year at least. But you can, depending on your time of year, you could get away from anything from full float to full float with those sink tips. So the lighter end of the Scandi, depending on how you want to fish and your water and sun conditions are all on the table. Kind of like Atlantic salmon, where it's at least over in a place like Ponoi, where it's like, okay, if you're setting out to catch fish on dry flies, we can do that. We can stick to that, and we can be successful and target that type of water and make that the day. And of course, might you have a few more fish on that same day with, say, an intermediate or sink 3 tip and a tube with a little bit more weight? Yeah, but it's great catching fish on dry flies. So
yeah,
if you can, why not?
Yeah, you got to go for it. And then my guess is the winter steelhead would be that classic Scandi body would work.
Yeah, that or the 4D. This was something I did a little bit of last year. We have a compact version of that which doesn't require a tip. It's it's an all-in-one shorter Scandi. That's the 3D Plus compact, and the one I really like for steelhead with that is the intermediate Sync 4 or Sync 6, and was successful with nice winter fish. With that setup. If you're dredging runs, it might not be the line for you, but if you're searching, fishing heads, fishing tails, looking for fish that have just stopped in and covering a lot of water, like a lot of winter steelhead fishermen do, that is something it's both really easy to fish. It'll same thing. It'll turn over those intruders. It'll turn over what you need to, unless it's water's blown and you're stacking tubes together or something.
Oh, right.
But overall, it's just a really fun way to fish quick, to fish methodically. And that line is still ending at about 6 inches per second. If you have a little V, or the river splits and you're coming into that, it's more than enough to make sure that's in the fish's face.
Pescador on the Fly offers a full spectrum of fly fishing gear for any angler at any budget. By bringing high-performance rods directly to the angler, they eliminate the middleman markup, saving you time and money. The top-tiered El Rey series is designed for serious anglers, with the El Rey G6 being the most packable, high-performance rod on the market. And most anglers who try the G6 can't believe it is a 6-piece rod. It performs just like a 4-piece. There's no difference in performance. Whether you're fishing local streams or embarking on your next adventure across the world, the G6 delivers precision and power wherever you go. You can get 10% off your next order right now if you use the code WETFLYSWING at checkout. That's pescadoronthefly.com. Use the code WETFLYSWING for 10% off. Never fly without your G6. Discover the El Rey series and more at pescadoronthefly.com. Maybe let's talk about the rods a little bit. You mentioned the length, but what would be a good rod if, let's just take it to Chinook for a guideline. What would be a rod somebody should be picking up?
Depends on the place. If you're headed to one of the larger rivers, like say the Togiak, or even where I was started guiding a while ago on Lake Creek.
Was that the Alaska?
So yeah, I was on Lake Creek and the Yetna, and then doing some float trip stuff through Bristol Bay. So Good News.
Oh, okay.
Togiak actually, but the upper end of it, the different forks of the Good News. But some stops for salmon fishing, like we'd stop and have king runs on that, but that was kind of an everything trip. But to get back to your question, so for one of those larger rivers, heavier lines, heavier sink tips, big casts and big flies. Yeah, the 14-footer is great. We have one that's called the Fast Full Flex. It's a really cool action. It's a little bit different, but you get it all the way down to the cork. And even if you don't want to move over to Scandis, these rods will take Skagits too, and that's a phenomenal Skagit rod. I fish a fist on it sometimes if I really want to get down and put a big chunk of T17 on there. And you can get a lot of distance with that rod. There's the cool thing with the Guideline end of the two-handers is it's had a long time to be developed. If you look at, there's something for everybody. So if you look at on the premium side of it, at the 12'9" length, there'll be a 7/8 and an 8/9. At the 13'9", there'll be an 8/9 and a 9/10, and so forth. So, as specific as you want to get with it, it's all there. If you're getting a first two-hander, maybe not just kings, but maybe everything, I think that 12'9" or like 13 feet is a really, really good length. You can do a lot with that. You can handle Skagits. You can handle these Scandinavian style lines. You could take something like a 12-foot 8/9 down to Argentina and catch sea run browns with it. You could catch any steelhead in the world with it. Most Atlantic salmon. You could deal with a chinook, no problem. It's just when you get into your more specific fishing situations, that's up to the viewer, the listener. That's where you get the more specialty stuff in.
No, this is awesome. And so there, you got the different length, and you mentioned 8/9, 9/10, and you're talking kind of line weights there. Maybe talk about that. How do you set up, if somebody wanted to either pick up a line or a rod or either or, how would they balance it? Because you mentioned, kind of line weights there. Talk about that. How would you find the best line for the rod?
Yeah, so first of all, it depends on the fishing that they're doing. And I know that this kind of comes down to what we're saying over and over. So the type of fish and the time of year and what you're dealing with here.
Let's take it to, just for an example. Let's say we're doing steelhead fishing. Let's just take it to, say, Canada. We're going up to like Skeena, steelhead fishing. Let's just say we have an Echo rod, 8, and we're trying to put a line from from what you guys have on that.
Yeah, so our lines are Scandis, so the grain window for the 8, and this is the thing that I think gets the most complicated in setting up a two-hander. It's especially when you make the jump to Scandis. So you have your standard 8 weight rod. You can say, okay, I'm going to put a Skagit on there, and depending on how quick or how slow that rod is, we'll say 550. And different manufacturers have, it could be 540, it could be 575, but it's something in that for a Skagit, and then you put your tip on and you're good to go. Scandis, even though they're longer, the rod is going to need a little bit lighter of a window of what that rod is going to take. So for our 8 weight, and I'm going to use our premium 12'9" 8'9" as an example instead of the 7'8". So a little bit on the heavier end of what you're saying with that 8. Also, it's quick. It's quicker than an Echo. Your window for the Scandi is 490 to 540 grains, so a little bit lighter.
Gotcha. So you're dropping down kind of one, or essentially, 50 grains or something like that below. So, and is there I know there's some templates out there to kind of put that together. I guess calling you guys would be the best thing to do, just to put that together.
Well, the cool thing is every single rod we make, and this goes for single handers as well. If you look right there on the rod, you'll have a gram and grain window.
Oh, okay, on the rod. Yeah, right. Okay, gotcha.
There's no guesswork there. Different casters like some like their rod on the low end of it. Some like to overweight and go a little bit higher. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at least you've got a really concrete area of where you're going to start there. 490 to 540 for that one, and every single rod will say that. And the cool thing is the single handers too. And one thing I wish that a lot of sinking line manufacturers would do is give that exact weight of not just the head, but the full line.
Yeah, the full line, right. Nice. And what about, going back a little bit again, even further here on, do you know a little bit about the history of Guideline? You mentioned, I think, the founder there. Did you say it was a 30-year-old company?
Yeah, so I can give you the quick history lesson. I might have to get Leif on here to.
Right, Leif, right. That's right. I've heard a lot about Leif. His name's definitely popped up over the years. We've never had him on, but yeah, let's hear the quick, brief history.
So the first products were introduced in 1991 under the name Power Taper. In 1993, it was established as a company, and you had the range of rods and lines being introduced. And then by 2001, it had expanded to Norway and Sweden. The main warehouse is now not in Norway; it's in Sweden, and grew to a growing distribution in 35 countries now, and a U.S. project not on the way in the middle of.
Yeah, in the U.S. and I think I remember because I kind of grew up around a little fly shop my family had, but I remember I think it was the early 90s. I kind of remember that Guideline. So when they came, did they come to the U.S. in for a little bit in the early part of those days?
A little bit, and I'd say that within your serious, especially two-hand circles here, that it would not be a new name, but it's not a massive company over in terms of who's there and working in it. There's a rep for all the major European countries. I'm here in the U.S. I would say in Scandinavia and Europe and New Zealand now, it's grown into one of the larger household names of a brand, but it's still small enough. And what I mean by that is everybody in the company, it's a cool thing that goes with Scandinavian fishing that you don't really get here. If I said switch rod 7/8, 11'6", I would get the grain window from anybody, even someone in the warehouse, someone answering the phones, like that. Everyone is a total fish.
Yeah, they're fish nerds.
Nerd. And it just comes with the culture there. So it's really cool to work with people that yeah, when they want to test something, they're brutal with it. It needs to come out to the exact little technical detail, and nothing less is gonna be okay.
That's perfect. Are you guys are focusing in the U.S. Or are you focusing more on the double hand stuff because you have a little bit of everything right out there?
Oh, so I would say that has been the biggest sort of misconception of the company to get over at this point of, yeah, we make awesome double handers. When I got my first Guideline double hander in my hand, yeah, on the Kola, my mind was blown. I didn't think you could do that with these. And it made learning those other styles really easy.
Yeah. Was this because of the full flex of the rod, or what was that?
The full flex is a rod that we make now.
Oh, that's the name. Yeah, that's the name of the rod.
Yeah, it's called a fast full flex. It's got a kind of a unique action.
But were those rods back in the day on the Ponoi? Were they kind of a full action rod? Like were they bent? You said bending all the way in the cork, or what was the difference on those rods where you picked them up? You're like, wow, this thing is kind of amazing.
I would say it's the weight, the feel, and where the rod responds to what you're doing. So it's not necessarily that every rod is going to be more full flex. I would say that's not the case. That's that specific rod. Like any other manufacturer, you look on the website and you're going to have different actions that correspond with different price points and different, in this case, techniques. And this goes with the single handers as well. Scandinavian rods are developed to throw Scandis. And the cool thing about these short Scandis is that there's a few adjustments to your cast. It's a lot more bottom hand. It's very tight. It's in the box, but if you can do that, the rod will handle Skagits too, and it doesn't really work the other way around.
So that's the cool thing about these is that if you get the right line, you can do kind of a little bit of everything. It sounds like
It can handle every line. Is that if it can handle the tough ones, it can handle the easy ones. But if it's a rod made to handle just chucking weight and it doesn't correspond to the finesse of a Scandi as well. That was how I got into them, and the two-hand rods are mind-blowing. But the biggest misconception in the U.S. with the brand is it's a two-hand brand, and it's really not. A lot of the Scandinavian and European fishing, and there's plenty of single-hand stuff too. And one of the things is the price points of them are not crazy. It's made for anglers. So our standard single hand 5 weight, 9 foot 5 weight, the NT11 trout. It's our premium, but it comes in at like a mid-priced US rod. It's like $5.99. But we took the mid-priced Yellowstone Shootout category by a large margin, and we're quite a bit above some of what they rated as the premium rods too. So the trout rods are fantastic. I was a two-hand guide, but my personal love for fly fishing is in saltwater.
right. So that's a whole nother thing, and you got the salt too. So pretty much everything. And if it was a like trout, so 6 weight trout rod, you got lines, you got rods, you got it all for everything.
Everything. And it's not just rods, there's waders, there's boots.
Cool. And we'll put a link out so everybody can take a look at some of the lineup. It's interesting because I always love seeing the waders. There's lots of wader companies out there, but there's probably just a few that are high level, kind of higher level stuff, right?
Yeah, and we're planning for at least our higher end ones, and they've been coming over to the States at least in the last year. We'll have them at the fly fishing shows this winter for people to come take a look at. But yeah, those high end waders are solid. I spent a couple seasons guiding in them, and the 2 sessions a day, Icelandic lava rock. I'd say that's as good a test on waders as any.
Are you this is the random question, the start of the random questions. Are you more of a waders? Do you like the waders that kind of have the zip, the piss zip sort of thing, the straight down, or do you like more of the full waders where you know what I mean, you have to roll them down?
I like the zip, and I like durable. I like reinforcement all the way up to my waist, like extra reinforcement. And our Altas do that.
The Alta, yeah, the Altic. I'm looking at them now, kind of the Sonic zip weight or whatever. There's a whole bunch of, yeah, you got a bunch of them.
So NGx.
NGx. Oh, I see it. Yeah, NGx.
That's my favorite one. But there's some new stuff coming there too. The Laxas are probably the most sold ones through Europe, and that's a great, it's a $400 wader, but it gets the job done. We've got some guides here in the US even in those with no issues, but yeah, it's more so just stuff that's been tested accordingly and made to fish.
Amazing. So, and back on the trout, back to that here. Are all the lines now, like if it was a trout 6-weight, is that technically a Scandi line? And could you do all this stuff we're talking about with the Skagit style or Spey type casts
on the trout lines on there on the weight forward? So those are just standard.
Those are standard. Okay.
Regular weight forward. If you're on the website and you're looking to do this, that's your shooting head.
Yeah, that's your shooting head. Okay.
Yeah, the weight forward fly lines. Yeah, think of them as the same as their U.S. counterparts, and then your taper and your desired tactics with it. Like if you want a double taper, if you want something made for little dry flies, if you want a heavy indicator line, everything in between. That's all there, and that's kind of what I was saying. It's not. As you're flipping through the site, it's definitely not just two-handers. Two-handers is just a little bit of what we actually do. It's pretty much everything in modern fly fishing now.
It is. Okay. And we always think of it here, when you think US, you think whatever the percentages are, 80% trout or something like that, right? Or it's changing a lot. And then you got everything else, steelhead and things like that. But in kind of looking on the other side of the pond, is it kind of that? Is trout still the biggest thing, and then Atlantic salmon, all these other species are like way secondary?
It's funny. It depends where you go in the world. And even in our employees, you see it. You have guys that are trout fanatics, and you have down to, the amount of CDC that they're tying on the dry fly for.
Oh yeah. Getting super nerdy on the fly tying.
22-foot leaders and the whole deal with it. And then you have the same thing in salmon. So I'd say it really depends on the region. But you do see a lot more people starting to branch out. And some of that is because, salmon fishing in a lot of these places isn't necessarily what it was. It's not the most accessible part of fly fishing. In Sweden, actually, and parts of Norway, you hear about all these rivers that you can never get on, but there are alternatives. If you want to go fish public or almost public water on Orkla, you could do it pretty cheap.
Okay. And there's other, Atlantic salmon, and we're heading over to the northeast part of the country, this year, trying to chase them. You've got all that, which is actually pretty good. It sounds like fishing's still pretty good up there, which is accessible, but still that's a long trip, heading out to, wherever you're talking about, kind of out there in Canada. But what else are we missing here? Anything else we want to touch on before we get out of here in a little bit, as far as just products and, kind of people are looking to get into this?
Yeah. The biggest thing that I don't think we touched as much on is the saltwater side of things.
Oh yeah.
That's come a long, long way. Like I said, that's what I grew up with.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Stripers and cold water stuff is home. I love permit fishing. I'm still constantly frustrated by Keys permit, but that's a conversation for another time. Probably happiest doing that or tarpon fishing or something like that. And yeah, there's some big strides coming in that department, apart from the rods that we've got to look forward to this year, something I've been messing around with, but also those Celine rods. I can't preach about them enough. They're phenomenal. The NT11, the T1100 graphite is super light. It's super strong. You can put so much pressure on fish, and they're just a pleasure to cast. That's actually been, if you look at where we're making the most impact in the U.S. thus far, it's not where you would expect. It's actually in those, and then it's on the Euro nymphing side. We've got a couple guides running the Euro rods with their clients, and for the price point and what you can actually do with the sensitivity of them. I would say that the LPX nymph is probably coming over almost every day in terms of orders. It's not a hard jump for a Euro nymphing rod from a European brand, but I would say as far as like U.S. favorites, the saltwater rod and the Celine and then that Euro rod have probably been our two biggest ones that have taken off in the last year or so.
And was that kind of to be expected, or was that kind of a surprise getting into this, or was that something you were pushing yourself?
The Euro side was something that I more so left in the hands of our ambassadors that live and breathe it, and they did a great job with that and fished that rod to its fullest potential. It was developed for international competition, so it's and under the same scrutiny as the other products. So, for those that want a Euro nymph, they do love it. And then the saltwater one was something that I wouldn't necessarily say pushing, but just because that's a lot of the fishing that I do when I'm over here, it definitely translates over.
Where are you at physically now? Where's your home water?
Little bit of everywhere. I still fish Connecticut at the best times. I love the fall run. I love really big fish in the spring back here.
The stripers?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
40, 45 inch.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that, and I've never fished stripe. And that's definitely on my bucket list. But we just did a podcast with somebody who was describing just the way it is of how addicted people are of it. Like people are up there just like giving up, holding everything in life to chase these stripers. What is it about that striper thing that gets, especially up in the Northeast, that people are so fired up?
It's the perfect game fish because you can chase it in every single way. If you want to catch them in 8 inches of water on the flats and throw strong arm crabs at them, you can. If you want to go out to a rip and rip squid flies, you can do that too. My favorite way in the spring is with high density, fast sinking grain lines and really big flies for those big fish. And when you fish them in tide instead of the current of a river, it's the most similar take to a big Atlantic salmon that we have here. The thump is identical. Strip set a little bit and lift the rod, and instead of a 40-pound Atlantic, which is a fish of a lifetime, you have that fish it's achievable.
What, and is that the take of Atlantic salmon? How similar is that to some of the other the steelhead or the chinook?
Depends on the water temperature, but it's closer to a steelhead, especially with the surface stuff. I think I mentioned it, but like those fish want the fly moving. My best guiding tactic for them, both Iceland, Russia, I personally did it in Norway too, is I like to roly-poly it, which is the two-hand strip just faster than the speed of the currents. No upstream mend, get your depth with the fly in line, and then just keep that fly moving around. And a lot of times you see it, which is really cool.
This is great. Well, let's take it out here really quick. This is our kind of shout out to our travel program, basically, and we're heading around the country, and we got a few big destinations. I mentioned them here today, but this one today is presented by Togiak River Lodge because we are heading up there, and it's going to be amazing because I really haven't gone hardcore on the Chinook. This is like my first time, really. I mean, I fished for him, but not like this, and so we're excited to get up there, and I think, we can talk more about this, but, again, having the right gear for the job is huge. So shout out to Togiak River Lodge first. For you, the question is, it sounds like you fished all around the world to some of the greatest places, but what's left for you? You've got salt. It sounds like you're addicted to that too. If you had to pick one destination, that you haven't been to, what is that one?
That I haven't been to. My biggest thing currently at the moment, one of my good friends and I fish the Keys permit tournaments together. We do the IGFA, and we're due. It's time to get a fish on the board. There's been too many wiggles. There's been too many close calls.
That's a tournament up there still going on.
Mm-hmm. That one's every fall, and we're looking to do more of them. But a Keys permit on fly done properly is worth $1 million somewhere else. Those fish are really special.
So who's typically winning that tournament? Is that how many fish are they hooking into?
One.
Yeah,
one,
so that's it. It's that hard.
Yeah. If you get one, you're getting a trophy.
Right. Wow. Yeah, love it. Love it. So
It's like 800 hours of bow time between everybody, and there'll be usually 2 or 3 fish caught, maybe 4.
wow. And why is that is it just because of has that evolved? Because we've talked about tarpon, how there's been ups and downs there with the tarpon, but is that the Keys? It sounds like the Keys are just hard all around for a lot of species.
Yeah, those fish get a lot of pressure. It's the A game world of saltwater fly fishing. You you don't go there without practicing, and some of it, like I know the lower Keys bonefish population has gotten it's rebounded in recent years, but for where people are actually catching the permit, you need to go further and further for your shots. And some of it's down to what you're going to see that day and finding the right fish. But compared to, if someone wants to catch their first permit and is headed to Mexico, where on a good day they get 30 shots and then they can make it happen, it takes a long time to get those 30 good shots.
Wow.
On what are big singles and doubles and not schools of little guys.
That's the extreme. That it sounds like that is maybe you talked about steelhead and muskie. But it sounds like maybe permit, is that the hard, like what, there's probably some other species, but it seems like permit might be the hardest one out there.
I don't know. It's kind of like Atlantics, where like the easiest permit in the world is the one that eats your fly. It's just the rest of them are a pain. It's just a fish that, like it or not, it requires significant both time and money investment to get to where you're going to be casting at one. And there's places you can do it cheaper, and you can do it more and get more shots, I should say. But those keys fish ones are, if you like to sight fish, it's the ultimate. It's like, it's like catching it's a steelhead on a dry line on the OP in winter versus anything else versus, I'm trying to think what's even a prolific steelhead fishery at this point, but
Oh, right. Yeah. What is it? On a dry?
yeah, but like versus the babine, it'd be like rare enough to swing up a winter fish where maybe there's only a handful of those caught all year.
That's right.
Same thing with a 50-pound Atlantic in Norway. There's not many of them, but
No.
they exist.
God, that's a giant fish. Yeah. Okay. We've got a couple of resources. We'll put links in the show notes as we head out of here. But this has been awesome. I think you've got us fired up for, a couple of places, the Argentina, of course, Iceland, we didn't touch on either. And we hear a lot about Iceland. I think even with these other runs around the country, you hear about some ups and downs of Atlantic salmon. It sounds like Iceland is still the place. Well, let's maybe touch on that, but just before we jump out of here, why is Iceland seem like, I've heard about these things in other Atlantic places around the area that aren't doing well. What's up with Iceland? Why is it still strong?
So there's two ends of the Iceland salmon fishery. I'll try to do this as quick as possible. There's the southern stuff like East and West Ranga, and those are hatchery fish. It's like a prolific hatchery out west, and there's tons of them. And you're going to catch fish, and you're going to catch a ton of fish, and the lodging is great, the experience is great. But then you get up into the northern stuff, which is what you might have heard about. I guided Thurau on the west coast, and then Vitadalsau up north. Vitadalsau was a big fish river. Thurau was a little bit of everything, but the barrier to fishing in Iceland is the cost. It's really easy to get there from the US, but your license to even fish those rivers for salmon, the price is astounding. It's like when I showed up there to guide, I asked about it so I could learn the river, and the first few days I just ended up driving and looking at the pools.
Oh, real? How much does it cost?
Oh, it depends on the river, but it could be $3,500 a day for your
wow.
license. Just, go fishing, not the guide, the lodging. So it's not necessarily accessible, but there are some rivers like the Sog that do have salmon that are cheaper. And there is a little bit of accessible stuff. Otherwise, to be honest, I'd go for the trout.
Yeah,
I'd
the
go
trout.
that's a whole other thing in itself too. But with those prices does come exclusive and consistent salmon fishing. So you're not going to catch 1,600 fish in a week between everyone like the Kola, but a reasonable angler could expect to get a couple fish a day there. And there's a lot of single hand, it's light double handers, floating lines. A lot of the time you see the fish. It's really visual. It's cool fishing. But same sort of thing. Like you, at least as a guide, you could break it down to as hard or as easy as you wanted to do it. If you said, I'm going to take a floating line, I'm going to put a long leader, and if it's before July 20th, I'll put a small sunray or hitch tube, black overwing, blue or green underwing, you're going to be fine. Like you can cover your water, get your running fish and do it. And then after that, chuck a Red Francis on and you'll probably be fine too.
Right.
But long story short, there's fish.
Yeah, there's fish. Okay. And you just kind of reminded me, I wanted to ask you, we talked fly color and all that. We can talk about that, but just let's talk Atlantic salmon. Somebody's going out there, maybe a couple, 2 or 3 tips if they haven't hooked one yet, maybe it's their first time. What are you telling somebody that's chasing Atlantic salmon?
Don't lift the rod too early.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Because that's the thing, you're going to get some activity, some feedback.
Yeah. Well, those fish, they don't take, like the take itself, it might feel similar like a steelhead, but I think they turn a little bit longer. The way when we were doing sea run browns, you could set the hook. You're going to be fine. Like those fish turn and take the fly different. I think Atlantic salmon hold it a bit longer. They wait to turn a bit more. So I really just wait to feel the weight of the fish before you're lifting the rod.
Okay. So just sit there and just let it do its thing until you feel the weight.
Mm-hmm. And that's why that roly-poly strip, the hand over hand, 2-hand retrieve, works so well. I would always tell my clients to do that because even if they try to strike and the rod is under their arm, by the time they've lifted the rod, the fish is already on.
Oh, are you saying like, so once you've made your swing, then you do the roly-poly? Is that what you're saying?
No, the whole way around. I'm speeding up my swing, and then the fish is going to come and take it, and I'm just hold it tight until he's on and lift the rod up there. Atlantics they don't like pauses. They like it quick. They want it coming around. I mean, I think they respond to that chase, that cat and mouse, really well, actually.
Okay, so wait on the fish. And what's another tip you would add in there for Atlantic salmon?
I would, same thing. I would avoid your upstream mend. If you look at that and look at what that does to a swung fly, and obviously if you've got structure or you're trying to get it down in between some boulders or something, this is not a one tip fits all case. Generally, if I'm working down a run and I mend, my fly's not fishing anymore.
Right. I think a lot of people tend to you get stuck in some of those things. Like, okay, make a cast, mend. That'll get it down further, right?
You could do the couple steps. I mean, it would achieve the same thing. But really, I want to get to my depth with Atlantics, with the line and with the fly. And that way, the second it hits the water, it's fishing. Those fish, if they're there and they're going to take it. A happy fish will take absolutely anything. You're just trying to maximize your chances by keeping your fly fishing effectively. And then my last tip for it is going to be try to be consistent in your fishing. And what I mean by that is the more time your fly spends in the water doing all these things, you've got your retrieve down, you've got what the fish want in that water temperature and water speed. You're swinging your fly down. You're not stopping your presentation. You haven't struck them at the end, but overall, if you're casting, say you're doing a double spey on river right, and then halfway through you switch it up and I'm going to go off my left shoulder all of a sudden, and I'm going to start throwing a single spey. Your angle at which your fly is moving and your presentation is different. You've changed it up. Now the time in which I would do that is, say I found a fish. He's came up. He's boiled behind my fly. I'm going to take a couple steps up and I'm going to work him different. If I was stripping, maybe I'm going to put it slower this time. Maybe I'm going to give him a different angle. But in general, you've developed an idea of what's working. Your same angle as steelhead is going to work. And until you get that reaction, consistency is everything. I'm going to keep putting it out there at that same angle. I'm going to have confidence in what I'm doing is working. I'm going to keep working my fly around the same. And then I've fished the pool all the way down. I've fished my water, I've fished my run, and then I'll change it up. Maybe I'll wait a little further this time and fish that outside seam. Maybe I'll put on a heavier tip. Maybe I'll go bulkier with the fly. Maybe I'll change the color of the underwing. Maybe I'll change the leader length. The fun part of this is it's the puzzle. You can play around as much as you want, and there's no wrong answers, but sometimes there's a right one.
Yeah, right. No, it's awesome. I think that's what's good about the swinging the flies, right? It's a systematic approach. You get in the water, even if it's a new run you've never fished before, you can start at the top and cover that whole run. And then you'll know where, if you're doing, well, sometimes you'll know, right? If you're doing it right, you'll get some feedback. It sounds like Atlantic salmon, you're probably getting the most feedback over compared to, say, winter steelhead or chinook. Right? And Atlantic salmon and summer steelhead are probably the most, they feel like the similar species.
They're the most honest fish there is. If they're there, they're going to tell you. They're gonna 100% tell you, and they're not shy about it. Whether they end up taking the fly or not is up to you. But there's a lot of ways to make that happen, and it's a really cool process to get to both watch and be a part of.
Nice. All right, Max. Well, I think we'll leave it there. We'll send everybody out to guidelineflyfishing.com. We'll have a link in the show notes to that. And yeah, I just want to thank you for your time today. This has been awesome. I love that we've traveled around the world and, talked swinging. But the cool thing is like you said, we shed light on it. It's not just two-handed game. You guys have it all, including the trout, saltwater. So we'll be in touch for sure as we move forward. And thanks for your time.
Thanks so much. And yeah, if anybody has any questions on rod actions or anything specific, I've fished pretty much everything on there at this point, and I've got my personal favorites too for all the U.S. situations. And lucky in that I spend a fair bit of time on the water. So if anyone has questions, I can point you in the right direction. If it's a shooting head recommendation, if it's a trout line, if it's saltwater stuff, I'm more than happy to. So thanks so much.
All right, quick call to action, quick reminder for you. If you're interested in learning more about the Scandi, all the stuff they have going from Scandi, two-handed, everything they got, check in with Max, let him know you heard this podcast, and also pick his brain about some of those trips that he's been on around the world. That would be great. Before we get out here, please follow this show, Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. That's the easiest way to make sure that next episode gets delivered right into your inbox. And that next episode is a good one. We got Brian Niska back for In the Bucket. This is our In the Bucket series on exploring spey fishing in the Pacific Northwest. Brian is doing an amazing job over there at In the Bucket. Don't miss this one. That's coming up soon. And click that subscribe button. All right. Hey, one last shout out. We have still a spot open for Togiak River Lodge. Again, we're talking chinook here. If you're interested in chasing chinook in one of the great places in Alaska, king salmon, some say the greatest fish on the fly. King salmon, Togiak River Lodge. Send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com. I'll let you know what we have at availability. And when you do that, just put chinook salmon in the subject line, and I'll know what to follow up on that email. All right, we're heading out the door here. We got a good day. It's cold. It's winter time, but spring is just around the corner. Let me know where you're coming at right now, what you're looking forward to in the next couple months as we get into spring. I'd love to hear where that first place is you're going. Maybe as soon as ice gets out, maybe you're up in the northern part of the country and you're looking forward to maybe getting off the tying bench and heading out for some fishing. If that's you, if you're up in the northern part of the country, let me know. Send me an email, dave@wetflyswing. Always love to hear where people are coming from. I know there's people listening out there. That reminds me of who you are, and always good. All right, hope you have a great morning. Hope you have a great afternoon, or if it's evening, hope you have a fantastic evening wherever you are in the world. Look forward to talking to you on the next episode. We'll see you then.